In the winter of 1943, Oberst Wilhelm Schäfer of the 21st Panzer Division crouched behind the twisted metal of a burned-out Kübelwagen near Alamein, watching through his field glasses as another American convoy rolled past in the distance. What he saw defied everything the Wehrmacht had been told about American industrial capability. Dozens of identical olive-drab vehicles moved with mechanical precision across the desert sand, each one carrying supplies, personnel, and weapons with an efficiency that made his gut clench with a terrible realization. The Americans were not just winning battles, they were drowning the Axis in an ocean of steel, rubber, and mass-produced mobility that Germany could never match. The vehicle that would come to symbolize this industrial juggernaut had begun as nothing more than a desperate American Army procurement request in June 1940. With war consuming Europe and the Wehrmacht's mechanized divisions proving unstoppable, the United States War Department issued a specification that would change the course of warfare forever. They needed a lightweight, four-wheel-drive reconnaissance vehicle capable of carrying a crew of 3, mounting a machine gun, and operating in every conceivable environment from Arctic tundra to desert sand. The specifications were demanding. A wheelbase no longer than 80 inches, tracks no wider than 47 inches, a folding windshield for air transport, and a maximum weight of 1,300 pounds. Most crucially, they wanted it designed, tested, and ready for mass production in just 130 days. 135 American automotive manufacturers received the bid invitation. Only 3 responded: the tiny American Bantam Car Company, struggling Willys Overland Motor Company, and the Ford Motor Company. What emerged from their collaborative competition would become the most produced military vehicle in history, a machine so fundamentally sound that it would serve as the template for utility vehicles across the globe for decades to come. But in June 1940, as German panzers rolled through France and the British Expeditionary Force evacuated from Dunkirk, nobody could have predicted that this humble quarter-ton truck would become the physical embodiment of American industrial might. The American Bantam Car Company, based in Butler, Pennsylvania, delivered the first prototype in September 1940. Designed by Karl Probst in a legendary 18-hour marathon session, the Bantam Reconnaissance Command Vehicle, or BRC, exceeded every expectation during its initial trials at Camp Holabird, Maryland. The little 1,840-pound machine could climb a 60-degree slope, ford 30 inches of water, and maintain a steady pace across terrain that would immobilize conventional vehicles. But Bantam was a tiny company, producing fewer than 1,300 vehicles per year. The War Department recognized immediately that if America entered the war, they would need hundreds of thousands of these vehicles, not hundreds. Willys Overland and Ford were invited to examine the Bantam prototype and create their own versions. Willys contributed the most significant innovation, the L-head Go Devil engine, a 1342 cubic inch power plant developing 60 honest horsepower at 4,000 RPM. This engine gave the Willys prototype a decisive advantage in power and torque, capabilities that would prove crucial in combat conditions. Ford contributed superior manufacturing techniques and the distinctive flat hood and integrated headlight design that would become iconic. By July 1941, the War Department had seen enough. Willys Overland won the primary contract with a bid of $748.74 per vehicle, and their design became the standardized Willys MB. In November 1941, the first production Willys MB rolled off the assembly line in Toledo, Ohio. Within weeks, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor thrust America into a global war, and the humble quarter-ton truck would face its baptism by fire across every theater of operations. But what the Axis powers encountered was not just a vehicle, it was the manifestation of a production system unlike anything the world had ever seen. Heinrich Mahler, a Wehrmacht transport officer captured near Cannes in July 1944, would later tell his American interrogators something that revealed the true psychological impact of the Jeep. "We knew you had good equipment," he said through an interpreter, his voice carrying the weariness of 3 years of retreating battles. "But we never understood what it meant until we saw the same vehicle, thousands and thousands of the same vehicle, everywhere we looked. In Russia, in North Africa, in Italy, in France. Always the same design, always working, always there. It was like fighting a factory, not an army." Muller had witnessed something unprecedented in military history. Between November 1941 and August 1945, American factories produced 647,925 Willys MB and Ford GPW vehicles. Willys Overland manufactured 361,339 units, while Ford added another 280,448, with American Bantam contributing early prototypes. To put this in perspective, Nazi Germany produced approximately 50,435 Kübelwagen vehicles throughout the entire war, less than 8% of American Jeep production. The Soviet Union, despite receiving over 20,000 American Jeeps through Lend-Lease, managed to produce 92,843 copies of their JZ-67 design. Japan, the most industrially advanced of America's enemies in the Pacific, manufactured fewer than 4,800 of their Type 95 Kübelwagen reconnaissance vehicles during 8 years of production. But raw numbers tell only part of the story. The true shock to Axis forces came from encountering American logistical capability in action. Every Jeep that rolled off a transport ship or rumbled down a European road carried with it the implications of America's production capacity. If the Americans could produce nearly 650,000 identical, high-quality military vehicles while simultaneously building the largest navy in history, constructing 300,000 aircraft and manufacturing millions of small arms, what did that say about their ability to sustain a war effort? Hauptmann Klaus Weber of the Afrika Korps had been among the first German officers to encounter American Jeeps in significant numbers during Operation Torch in November 1942. His unit, the 15th Panzer Division, had been fighting British forces across North Africa for 18 months, and they were accustomed to the reliability issues that plagued all desert vehicles. German Kübelwagen required constant maintenance in the sand and heat. British vehicles broke down with frustrating regularity. But the American vehicles seemed different. The first time I saw a captured Jeep, Weber wrote in his diary, which was recovered after his capture near Tunis in March 1943, I was impressed by its simplicity. No unnecessary components, no complex systems that would fail in the desert. Just a robust engine, simple transmission, and solid construction. But it was not until I saw 50 of them in a single convoy that I understood the true threat. These were not hand-built vehicles like our Kübelwagen. These were identical, mass-produced machines, each one exactly like the others. The Americans could lose 100 Jeeps and replace them with 100 identical vehicles within weeks. Weber's observation struck at the heart of Germany's strategic dilemma. German vehicle production was based on a craftsman model, with skilled workers hand-assembling vehicles using components that varied based on availability of materials. The Kübelwagen, based on the Volkswagen Beetle chassis, was an excellent design, but German factories could never achieve the production volumes necessary to equip their army adequately. Worse, as the war progressed and strategic bombing damaged German factories, production quality declined while American production increased. The psychological impact on German forces was compounded by their own successful capture and use of American Jeeps. Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS units prized captured Jeeps above any other Allied equipment. A classified American intelligence report from 1944 noted that Nazi generals admired the Jeep more than any other U.S. material, and it was the vehicle they most liked to capture for general use. German mechanics who worked on captured Jeeps were forced to acknowledge American engineering superiority. The Go Devil engine was more powerful than the Kübelwagen's air-cooled motor, the four-wheel drive system was more reliable than German designs, and the overall construction was simpler yet more durable. Franz Steiner, a Wehrmacht mechanic with the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard SS Adolf Hitler, spent 2 years maintaining captured vehicles on the Eastern Front. In post-war interviews, he described the contradiction between Nazi propaganda about American industrial weakness and the reality of American equipment. We were told that Americans were soft, that their equipment was poorly made, that they could not sustain a long war against German engineering, Steiner recalled. But every captured Jeep we examined told a different story. The metallurgy was excellent, the tolerances were precise, the design was elegant in its simplicity. These were not the products of an inferior industrial system, but German fuel shortages added another dimension to their relationship with captured Jeeps. American Jeeps consumed significantly more fuel than Kübelwagen, a problem that became acute as Germany's oil situation deteriorated. German forces who captured jeeps often had to abandon them not because of mechanical failure, but because they lacked fuel. This created a bitter irony. German soldiers coveted the superior American vehicles but could not afford to operate them, while American forces seemed to have unlimited fuel supplies for their mechanized operations. The Japanese Imperial Army faced different but equally demoralizing challenges when confronting American jeeps in the Pacific Theater. Japan had developed the Type 95 Kübelwagen in 1936, making it one of the world's first mass-produced four-wheel-drive passenger vehicles, predating the American Jeep by 5 years. The Kübelwagen was well-designed for its intended role, featuring an air-cooled V-twin engine that performed well in China's climate and simple construction that facilitated field maintenance. Japanese engineers could take pride in creating an indigenous design that anticipated the utility vehicle concept. However, the disparity in production capability revealed Japan's fundamental industrial limitations. Between 1936 and 1944, Japanese factories produced approximately 4,800 Kübelwagen vehicles. In contrast, American factories produced 647,925 Jeeps in less than 4 years, more than 135 times Japanese production despite starting 5 years later. For Japanese military planners who understood industrial capacity, this disparity was terrifying. If America could outproduce Japan by more than 100 to 1 in a single vehicle category, what did that imply about overall war production? Colonel Takashi Yamamoto of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff had access to intelligence reports about American production capability, but the full implications did not become clear until Japanese forces began encountering American equipment in large quantities during the Guadalcanal campaign in 1942. "We knew that America was a large industrial nation," Yamamoto wrote in his memoirs, published in Japan in 1952, "but we did not understand the scale until we began to see their equipment. Not just individual vehicles, but fleets of identical vehicles. Not just adequate equipment, but equipment of excellent quality produced in vast quantities." The Japanese military's response revealed both their engineering competence and their resource limitations. Japanese forces captured American jeeps whenever possible and subjected them to detailed technical analysis. Japanese engineers produced comprehensive reports comparing the Willys MB to the Type 95 Kübelwagen, and their conclusions were sobering. The American vehicle was more powerful, more durable, and more versatile than Japan's indigenous design. Moreover, American production techniques allowed for part standardization and simplified maintenance that Japanese manufacturing could not match. Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, who served with the 6th Army in the Philippines, experienced the psychological impact of American logistical superiority firsthand. His unit captured a damaged Jeep near Bataan in early 1942 and spent weeks attempting to repair it with improvised parts. "We admired the American engineering," Tanaka recalled in a 1960 interview. "The engine was more powerful than our Kübelwagen, the transmission was smoother, the construction was very solid. But what impressed us most was the standardization. Every bolt, every fitting, every component was precisely machined to exact specifications. This was not artisan work. This was industrial precision applied to military vehicles." But Tanaka's unit could never obtain proper replacement parts for their captured Jeep, highlighting another aspect of American industrial strategy. The Jeep was designed not just as an individual vehicle, but as part of an integrated logistical system. American forces could repair Jeeps in the field using standardized parts shipped from factories thousands of miles away. Japanese forces, even when they successfully captured American equipment, could not sustain it because they lacked access to the production and supply network that supported it. The Italian experience with American Jeeps reflected their nation's position as the weakest of the major Axis powers. Italian industrial capacity was insufficient to develop an indigenous utility vehicle comparable to the Jeep, Kübelwagen, or Kübelwagen. Instead, Italian forces relied heavily on captured equipment and improvised solutions. This dependency became acute during the North Africa campaign, where Italian units faced British, American, and Free French forces equipped with thousands of jeeps. General Giovanni Mess, who commanded the Italian First Army in Tunisia, observed American logistics operations during the final months of the North African Campaign in 1943. His post-war writings reveal the psychological impact of witnessing American industrial capability deployed in combat. The Americans did not just bring superior numbers, Mess wrote. They brought a different conception of warfare. Their vehicles, their weapons, their equipment, everything was standardized, mass-produced, designed for replacement rather than repair. We were fighting an industrial system, not just an army. Italian forces attempted to capture and utilize American jeeps whenever possible, but they faced the same challenges as German and Japanese units. Without access to standardized parts and proper maintenance procedures, captured jeeps could not be sustained in operation for extended periods. Italian mechanics developed improvised repair techniques and manufactured crude replacement parts, but these solutions were temporary at best. The technological gap between Italian and American industrial capability was simply too wide to bridge through field expedients. Captain Marco Russo of the R-8 Armored Division experienced this technological disparity during the Second Battle of El Alamein in October 1942. His unit captured 3 American jeeps during a successful counterattack, but only one remained operational after 2 weeks of desert fighting. The American vehicles were superior to anything we possessed, Russo wrote in letters to his family. But we could not maintain them properly. We lacked the tools, the parts, the technical knowledge. It was like capturing a piece of the future, but lacking the industrial base to support it. The Soviet Union's relationship with American jeeps was unique among the Axis powers because the USSR received substantial numbers through the Lend-Lease program while simultaneously developing their own indigenous designs. Between 1941 and 1945, America shipped approximately 20,000 jeeps to the Soviet Union, along with hundreds of thousands of other vehicles and millions of tons of equipment. Soviet forces thus had extensive experience operating American jeeps under combat conditions, providing them with detailed knowledge of American industrial capability. Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin's assessment of Lend-Lease assistance, delivered at the Tehran Conference in November 1943, revealed his understanding of America's industrial contribution to the war effort. I want to tell you what, from the Russian point of view, the President and the United States have done for victory in this war, Stalin told Roosevelt and Churchill. The most important things in this war are the machines. The United States is a country of machines. Without the machines we received through Lend-Lease, we would have lost the war. But Stalin's acknowledgement of American industrial capability came with a determination to match it through Soviet production. The JZ-67, developed by the Gorky automobile plant beginning in 1943, was directly inspired by American Jeep designs received through Lend-Lease. Soviet engineers studied the Willys MB extensively, reverse engineering its major components and adapting the design to Soviet production capabilities and material availability. Between 1943 and 1953, Soviet factories produced 92,843 JZ-67 vehicles, representing the largest indigenous utility vehicle production program outside of the United States. Colonel Ivan Petrov of the 3rd Guards Tank Army had extensive experience operating both American Jeeps and Soviet JZ-67 vehicles during the final years of the war. His technical reports, preserved in Soviet military archives, provide detailed comparisons between American and Soviet vehicle designs. The American Jeep is superior in almost every technical aspect, Petrov wrote in a 1944 assessment. More powerful engine, better transmission, superior metallurgy, more precise manufacturing tolerances. But our JZ-67 has advantages in cold weather performance and ease of field repair with available materials. Petrov's analysis revealed both Soviet engineering competence and their material limitations. Soviet designers created an effective utility vehicle using available resources and manufacturing techniques, but they could not match American production quality or efficiency. The JZ-67 required more maintenance than American Jeeps, suffered from reliability issues in extreme conditions, and lacked the refined engineering that characterized American designs. However, Soviet forces could produce the JZ-67 in substantial numbers using domestic resources, making it a more sustainable solution for the Red Army. Senior Lieutenant Mikhail Volkov of the 1st Guards Motor Rifle Brigade operated American Jeeps during the advance across Eastern Europe in 1944 and 1945. His letters home, published in Soviet military journals during the 1960s, described the psychological impact of American equipment on Soviet forces. When we first received the American vehicles, Volkov wrote, we were impressed by their quality and performance. But what impressed us most was the realization that America could produce such vehicles by the tens of thousands while fighting wars in Europe, Africa, and the Pacific simultaneously. This revealed an industrial capacity that we had not fully understood. The intersection of American Jeep production with Nazi Germany's slave labor system added another dimension to the Axis powers' understanding of American industrial capability. German forced laborers and concentration camp prisoners who had worked in American factories before the war provided German intelligence with insights into American production methods. These reports, discovered in German archives after the war, reveal Nazi recognition of American industrial superiority combined with ideological denial of its implications. A 1943 German intelligence report, compiled from interviews with European nationals who had worked in American automotive plants, concluded that American production methods emphasize standardization, mechanization, and worker specialization to achieve unprecedented output volumes. Individual worker skill levels may be lower than German standards, but systemic efficiency compensates for reduced craftsmanship. The report's authors struggled to reconcile Nazi ideology about racial superiority with empirical evidence of American industrial effectiveness. Otto Skorzeny, the SS officer responsible for special operations and industrial intelligence, was among the few Nazi leaders who fully grasped the implications of American production capability. In his post-war memoirs, Skorzeny described a 1943 briefing where he attempted to explain American industrial capacity to other SS officers. I showed them photographs of American automobile assembly lines, Skorzeny wrote, thousands of identical vehicles rolling off production lines every day. I explained that America was applying these same methods to military equipment production. Most of them dismissed this as propaganda, but some understood that we were facing an enemy unlike any we had encountered before. The German aviation industry provided another perspective on American industrial capability through their analysis of captured American aircraft engines and automotive components. Messerschmitt and Junkers engineers who examined Jeep engines were forced to acknowledge American metallurgical and manufacturing superiority. A classified Messerschmitt report from 1944 noted that American engine production demonstrates metallurgical techniques and quality control procedures that exceed our current capabilities. The standardization of components and precision of manufacturing tolerances suggests industrial methods that we cannot replicate under current conditions. But the most devastating analysis came from German logistics officers who attempted to calculate American production capacity based on observed equipment quantities. Major General Rudolf Holtzmann, responsible for Wehrmacht transport planning, produced a confidential assessment in March 1944 that outlined the strategic implications of American Jeep production. If American forces have deployed approximately 400,000 Jeep-type vehicles across all theaters, Holtzmann calculated, and if each vehicle represents 4 hours of assembly line labor plus raw materials and components, then America has devoted approximately 16 million man-hours to Jeep production alone. This suggests a total military production effort that exceeds German capacity by at least 10 to 1 inch. Holtzmann's calculations were conservative, but his conclusions were accurate. American factories were outproducing German industry by enormous margins while maintaining quality standards that German engineers could barely comprehend. The psychological impact on German military leadership was profound. Officers who had been conditioned to believe in German technological and industrial superiority were confronted with empirical evidence of American dominance in precisely those areas where Germany had claimed superiority. The impact of American Jeep production on Japanese strategic planning became apparent during the final years of the Pacific War. Japanese military leaders who had initially dismissed American industrial capability as inferior to European standards were forced to revise their assessments as American equipment flooded the Pacific theater. The disparity between Japanese and American production capability became impossible to ignore when Japanese forces encountered American units equipped with thousands of identical, high-quality vehicles. Admiral Somu Toyota, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet during the final phase of the Pacific War, described the psychological impact of American logistical superiority in his post-war testimony to Allied interrogators. We had planned our strategy based on the assumption that American industrial production would require years to reach full capacity, Toyota stated. We believed that Japan's early victories would provide sufficient time to consolidate our position and negotiate a favorable peace. But American production capability exceeded our most pessimistic estimates by enormous margins. The Japanese military's final assessment of American Jeep production, compiled by the Army General Staff in August 1945, revealed their complete understanding of the strategic implications. The American Jeep represents not just a military vehicle, but a demonstration of industrial capacity, the report concluded. American forces have deployed more utility vehicles in 4 years than the Japanese Army has deployed in its entire history. This suggests total American war production capacity that exceeds Japanese capability by approximately 50 to 1 inch. Italian military leaders reached similar conclusions through their own analysis of American equipment and production capability. General Alfredo Gazzoni, who commanded Axis forces in Sicily during Operation Husky in July 1943, witnessed American logistics operations firsthand during the Allied invasion. His post-war writings reveal the demoralization of Italian officers who recognized that their nation's industrial base could never compete with American production capability. The Americans landed on Sicily with more vehicles than the entire Italian army possessed, Gazzoni wrote in his memoirs. Every beach landing included dozens of identical jeeps, each one representing American industrial capacity that we could never match. We were not just fighting American soldiers, we were fighting American factories, American production lines, American industrial organization applied to military objectives. The final phase of the war in Europe provided the most comprehensive demonstration of American Jeep production's strategic impact. Operation Overlord, the Allied invasion of Normandy in June 1944, involved the deployment of more than 50,000 American vehicles in the first week alone, including thousands of jeeps. German defenders who survived the invasion described the psychological impact of witnessing American logistics operations in action. Oberstfreiter Hans Kruger of the 21st Panzer Division was captured near Caen during the Battle for Normandy. His interrogation transcripts, preserved in American military archives, reveal the demoralization of German forces confronting American industrial superiority. "We had been fighting for 5 years," Kruger told his interrogators. "We were experienced soldiers, well-trained, well-equipped by German standards. But the Americans brought a different kind of warfare. Everything was standardized, everything was mass-produced, everything could be replaced immediately. We damaged their vehicles, they brought more vehicles. We destroyed their equipment, they brought more equipment. It was like fighting a machine that could not be stopped." The German military's post-war analysis of American Jeep production, compiled by officers in Allied prisoner of war camps, provided the most comprehensive Axis assessment of American industrial capability. These reports, declassified in the 1970s, reveal German recognition that American production methods had revolutionized warfare itself. The American Jeep is significant not as an individual weapon system, but as a symbol of industrial warfare, concluded a report compiled by captured Wehrmacht officers in 1946. American strategy was based on overwhelming material superiority achieved through mass production techniques that no other nation could match. The 647,000 Jeeps produced by American factories represent just a fraction of total American war production, but they demonstrate the industrial foundation that made American victory inevitable. The Soviet Union's continued production of JZ-67 vehicles after the war ended reflected their determination to achieve industrial independence from American designs. But Soviet military assessments, preserved in classified archives, acknowledged that their indigenous vehicles remained inferior to American designs in most technical aspects. A 1947 Soviet evaluation concluded that American Jeep designs demonstrate manufacturing precision and component standardization that represents the highest achievement of capitalist industrial organization. The long-term impact of American Jeep production extended far beyond the immediate military applications during World War II. The mass production techniques developed for Jeep manufacturing influenced American automotive production for decades, while the vehicle's design became the template for utility vehicles worldwide. But perhaps most significantly, The psychological impact of American Jeep production on Axis forces contributed to their recognition of American industrial supremacy. The 647,925 Jeeps produced between 1941 and 1945 represented more than transportation assets or military equipment. Each vehicle that rolled off American assembly lines carried with it the implications of a production system that could manufacture nearly 650,000 identical, high-quality military vehicles while simultaneously building the world's largest navy, producing 300,000 aircraft and manufacturing millions of small arms. For Axis forces encountering American equipment on battlefields from North Africa to the Pacific, each Jeep represented proof of an industrial capability that their own nations could never match. The standardization that characterized Jeep production became a metaphor for American military organization itself. Unlike German vehicles that varied based on material availability, or Japanese vehicles that required specialized maintenance procedures, or Italian vehicles that were often improvised field modifications, American Jeeps were identical regardless of where they were manufactured or when they entered service. A mechanic trained on a Jeep produced in Toledo, Ohio could service a vehicle manufactured in Richmond, California using parts shipped from Louisville, Kentucky. This systematic approach to military logistics represented a conception of warfare that Axis powers had not anticipated and could not counter. The psychological warfare value of American Jeep production became apparent through Axis propaganda efforts to minimize its significance. German radio broadcasts claimed that American vehicles were inferior in quality to German engineering. Japanese newspapers argued that American mass production sacrificed reliability for quantity. Italian military journals suggested that American standardization resulted in inflexible designs unsuited to varied combat conditions. But the consistency of these propaganda efforts across all Axis powers revealed their recognition that American Jeep production represented a genuine threat to Axis morale and strategic confidence. By August 1945, when Japan announced its surrender, American Jeeps had operated in every theater of World War II, from the Arctic convoys to the Pacific atolls, from the North African desert to the European forests. They had been captured and coveted by every Axis power, studied and copied by every major military organization, and recognized by both enemies and allies as symbols of American industrial achievement. The vehicle that had begun as a desperate procurement request in June 1940 had become the embodiment of American production capability and a demonstration of democratic industry's superiority over totalitarian systems. The German intelligence officer who had crouched behind the burned Kübelwagen near El Alamein in 1943, watching American convoys cross the desert with mechanical precision, had witnessed the future of warfare. The age of artisan manufacturing and craft production had ended, replaced by systematic mass production that could equip armies with identical, high-quality equipment in unprecedented quantities. The Willys MB Jeep, produced 647,925 times between 1941 and 1945, had stunned the Axis powers not through technological innovation alone, but through its representation of an industrial system that could translate democratic capitalism into military supremacy. In the end, Nazi generals who admired captured Jeeps above all other American equipment, Japanese engineers who reverse-engineered American designs, Italian commanders who relied on captured vehicles for mobility, and Soviet leaders who acknowledged that Lend-Lease machines had enabled their victory, all recognized the same fundamental truth. America had not just won World War II through superior strategy or tactical innovation. America had manufactured victory through an industrial capability that transformed warfare itself, one standardized, mass-produced vehicle at a time.